are in people's instinctive travels through the paths of funk and rhythm. Yeah, all right. But firstly, I'm going to introduce my tribe, the tribe called Quest. Let me hear my tribe of Questers make some noise. Yeah, all right. Firstly, the foundation.
Hello, hello. Hello, hello. If you could all kind of kindly make your way to your seats. The raffle tickets are in the lobby still. If at some point you want to go get another raffle ticket, we will be announcing the winners at the end of the evening. Hello. Don't make me start singing. Um, so, you're like, maybe we will. We're now going to go on to the second half of the evening, which is going to be really lovely. We are going to have discussion on stage directed by Jackson Taylor, who for about 20 of the 40 years of the prison writing program has been directing the program. And he will be in conversation with Barbara Parsons and Wally Lamb and Wahida Clark. So please welcome Jackson Taylor. Thank you.
I don't know where the panelists are, but they're supposed to be here now. I think they're in the green room. Somebody just went to get them. I want to thank our chair, Claudia Menza, and I want to thank our amazing committee who does so much work. There we go. We're getting there. There's so many manuscripts to read every year, and there's so many voices. Come on up, and I'll move over one. There's so many voices to choose from, and you have to try to pick winners. And I think the important thing about this is that if we didn't do this reading, and we didn't have these amazing people coming to do this, you would not hear from these people in our society. They would be very forgotten. And I think that's pretty amazing that we get to talk to them and hear from them. I want to say one more thing. A member of our committee, Susan Rosenberg, has a memoir coming out in the spring. And just remember her name, Susan Rosenberg. And I've seen the pages. They're just, if you want to know what it's like to be in an American prison in this period of time, read this book. And Susan Rosenberg, don't miss it. She was a contest winner for the Penn Prison Program many times. So anyway, I've done my plug, and I wanted to do that. Nobody asked me to do that. I just felt like it was necessary. I want to talk to our panelists tonight about writing programs in prisons. Wally, you teach in a prison. Barbara was a student in Wally's class, and Wally had an extraordinary group of writers. He published an anthology through your publisher, HarperCollins, right? And the anthology was about to come out, and you were still inside then, right? And you got a notice from the state of Connecticut that you owed, how much was it?
$352,000 for costs of incarceration.
And if any of you have ever been in a literary memoir anthology, you know you make a lot of money for that. So, but she was getting charged for some sort of strange interpretation of possibly the Son of Sam law, but it's not really clear. So Penn got involved with the case, and Wally nominated Barbara the following year for the Newman Zone Award, which she won, and that changed everything. 60 Minutes got involved, and the next thing you know, the state had reversed its decision, but that took some doing. I'm shortening it quite a bit. But why don't you take the mic for me, Barbara, and maybe just talk a little bit about what it was like to go into a writing workshop for the first time.
Let's see. Wally had been coming to York for about a year before I entered the writing group. I had obligations of tutoring algebra that I couldn't get out of. And so I joined the literacy volunteer group and wrote a story called Dream Cottage. And it was a fantasy about how I would like my life when I was released from prison. And my teacher was so impressed by it that she took it to Dale Griffith, who was our liaison for the writing group with Wally. And so I had to, several of the teachers said they would sponsor or approve for me to join the writing group, and I could get out of tutoring algebra. So I had to write a little 200-word essay about why I wanted to write. And so I submitted that and then joined the writing group. I joined it mainly for therapy because one of my goals when I went to prison was to figure out how I got there. I was not your average criminal and had never committed any other crimes, and then I ended up committing a serious crime. And so I wanted to know what sent me over the edge and what broke me, and I decided I would use my sentence as a time to study myself and where I had lost myself. And so I was going to one-on-one therapy for survivors of abuse, and used my writing and Wally's writing group as a step in helping my, my recovery through survivors of abuse with my therapist. And I would go deeper into what sent me to prison and how I really had lost myself. I had become a mother and an employee and a wife, and a little piece of me belonged to everybody else except myself. So I was on a journey to recover, and the writing group was perfect because when I first started it, that was our main, seemed to be our main goal, was reaching into ourselves and finding out where we went wrong or the mistakes that we made or how we could help ourselves or help others.
Great. Wally, talk about your involvement with the writing workshop. How did you start doing it, and you're still doing it now, still twice every other Monday, is it?
Thursday.
Thursday, okay.
Yeah, I had no intention of doing this. I started my work at York primarily because I'm kind of a wimp and I have trouble saying no to good causes. And right, and so I even have in my office a little index card that sort of is my script when people call up, but I couldn't find my index card that day, and it was the librarian at York Prison calling up and saying, and she said, you know, we're in trouble down here. The new governor, this was Governor John Rowland, who later went to prison himself. She said, you know, his policy is to tighten the screws, and he had gotten elected on a campaign promise that once he was governor, these prisoners were going to know that they weren't living at Club Med, and so it got tough. It got a lot tougher. The guards were paramilitarized. Suddenly they had dogs and nightsticks that they were scaring the women with. One of the things I learned when I started working with the women is that the majority of them suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of them from childhood, a lot of them from abusive relationships and so forth. And then suddenly here are these male guards with attack dogs going around and screaming and yelling and making them, you know, fall to the floor and so forth. So what the librarian said was that 2 women had committed suicide and several more had attempted. Would I come and talk about writing? Well, they were just trying to distract the women. I had just recently had the good fortune of having a couple of books selected for the Oprah Book Club. So I went down and for what I thought was going to be this one time And I talked about writing. We did a couple of exercises, and I asked if anybody had any questions about writing. And the hands went up. This was the type of question. You met Oprah? Oprah's cool, you know what I'm saying? You know, but there was one woman who on that first visit, you know, she sort of scowled, you know, through the whole program. She was kind of tough looking, and I could see her eyes following me, thinking to herself. I imagined, you know, what the hell is this guy doing here? What's his game? What does he want? So I was very surprised when at the end of the period, I was packing up my stuff thinking that was it for my York prison experience. And she said, "Thanks for coming." And I said, "Oh, you're welcome." And she said, "Are you coming back?" And again, wimpiness won out. And that was 11 years ago. I'm still there. Now, Barbara, as she mentioned, I think she came in after we had been working together for about a year. And she was a really interesting story. Hers was a very interesting story, a very sad story. A lot of tragedy in her life from childhood on. And I remember, Barbara, when you entered the classroom, you were very hangdog. You had trouble with eye contact, and you just looked defeated by life. And yet she would write these really beautiful pieces. I wasn't too thrilled with that. What was it, Dream Cottage? Yes. Yeah, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to cure her of this corny writing, you know? But anyway, she's a very brave woman, and she started taking on the really tough stuff of her life. A mother's mental illness, and having been an incest victim when she was a very young child, and on and on and on. When Barbara brought a piece in, which was just about every time we met, she was definitely the good doobie student in this group. She could never at first read it. She would hand it to me or somebody else, and we would read her work aloud, and somebody always knew to pass the Kleenex box, or if there was no Kleenex on the teacher's desk, this big giant roll of toilet paper, you know, that got passed around. And Barbara would sit there and listen to her writing and cry. And one day, I'll never forget this, I turned to you and I said, "Boy, you must cry a river when you're writing and remembering about all this stuff." Do you remember what you said? Yeah. Yeah, she said, I don't cry when I'm writing it, I don't feel it. It's only when I hear it that it comes back to me. I'm not sure what the psychology is behind that, but I thought it was really fascinating. Anyway, you know, I've been a teacher all my adult life, but I have never had the opportunity before I went to York Prison to work with people over a number of years rather than just a semester or a single academic year. And so it was really exciting for me to see Barbara develop as a writer, as a critic of the other writers, and also, I dare say, she began to evolve as a person. Her self-confidence returned, and by the end of her prison stay, she was definitely one of the leaders of the group. She leads in a very quiet way, one of the best teachers that the group had, and she could read her stuff herself.
And I'm sure that prison is not Club Med, and yet at the same time, you have a writing workshop at that prison, and there are many prisons that don't have that, and I think it's important to note that. And also, you could at least use a pen and knew how to put a sentence together. Many people who are incarcerated can't do that. Remedial assistance is so essential to be taught. Now, Wahida, you were in Kentucky, right? And let me give you the mic. Why don't you tell us about your experience with the writing class?
Yes, I was in a federal, my name is Wahida Clark. I was in a federal penitentiary in Kentucky. I served 9.5 years. My prison job was in the law library, and also, like Barbara, I tutored computer classes. And one day I called home to my family, said, send me some money They said, Wahida, we'll see what we can do. The money is gone. So I'm like, what? And in prison, it costs money. You have to buy your soap powder, you have to pay to wash your clothes, you have to buy your hair products, blah, 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 blah. Then I had 2 teenage daughters that I left at home, and I was only locked up for like over a year. And my husband, he was also incarcerated. So I got off the phone, went back to the law library, and I'm just sitting there. And I said I have to do something. Number 1, to do my time. Number 2, to set up some kind of foundation for now and when I went home, because again, I had my 2 teenage daughters out there. And the next morning, I went to work, and I'm thumbing through a magazine, and it had a little article in there about a guy who was incarcerated, and he wrote a book. So I'm sitting in the chair, and I'm in the library. I'm the only one in there. I'm looking at all the books on the bookshelves. Then I start visualizing my name on the spine, Wahida Clark. And I said, okay. That's what was my light bulb moment. I said, I'm going to write a book. Never wrote before, never took a writing course. So it's fascinating how when you put something out in the universe, the forces just start working for you. Shortly after that, I said, okay, I'm going to write a book. I didn't know what to do. There was a young lady who came in as an inmate, and her profession on the streets was a literary agent. So she went to the camp administrator and said, could she give a creative writing class? So the administrator said yes. So next thing you know, I see this paper up on the wall saying, sign up for creative writing classes, 10 slots or whatever. So of course, I signed my name up, and to make a long story short, I took the course, started writing, and now I just finished my 9th book.
And you've got sort of a publishing empire, right? You've got your own company.
How can
right?
I forget that?
May I say what you're known as? You're the queen of thug fiction?
Thug love fiction.
Thugs fiction. There you go.
I had to give Wally that book because that piece that I read by Chastity, that was good. And he so happened that's his student. So I said, oh, you got to give her this book because I really enjoyed reading both of those pieces that I did tonight. But what was I saying, y'all?
You were talking about your company. You have a
right.
company.
So while I was in prison, I got published while in prison, and it's ironic. When my first book came out, that book that Wally is holding, it had a different cover. But one day the prison lieutenant came to get me, took me to the lieutenant's office and asked me, had a book. One of my books, he said, what is this? So I said, what do you mean, what is this? He said, how did this happen? I said, you guys gave a creative writing course on how to get published.
Was the course transformative for you in a way other than just making a book?
It was short, it was brief, I got my certificate, and I moved on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
After he asked me, what was this? How did this get done? They sent me back, then they called me back 7 o'clock the next morning. They said, Ms. Clark, we're going to have to put you in a hole while we investigate how you did this right here. So they put me in a hole for 8 months while they investigated how I was able to get a book published from a course that they gave on how to get published and write. So they kicked me out of Lexington and sent me to Alderson, West Virginia with Martha Stewart. But while I was in the hole, I ended up writing another book. I met Martha Stewart. I wrote more books. I just kept at it. But I'm humbled to be here, and while I was in prison, I said that to say this, that as soon as my book started floating around, the prison system, state, federal, other inmates started sending me manuscripts. They said, Wahida, how did you do that? I'm locked up, I write, how can I get on like you? So I started reading, and I said, okay, I'm going to be a literary agent. I'm going to start my own publishing company, all behind the prison walls. Next thing you know, I get called in Alderson, I get called down to the lieutenant's office again because I was getting all this fan mail and manuscripts, and they said, you're running a business here, Ms. Clark. You're out of here. I got in trouble again. But now that I'm home, I have my own publishing company, Wahida Clark Presents Publishing. I have about 14 authors. All of them are incarcerated except for maybe 2. And that's what I do, y'all.
Yeah. Barbara, Wally's told your story of the class. Let's hear it from your side of it. What was it like to go in there? What did you do? What did you feel happened to you as a result of that?
In Wally's writing class?
Yeah, or just in writing in general.
Writing in general, well, I like to write so that people can visualize what I'm writing. I, I have like a good memory where I can picture where things were in a room 10 years ago or whatever. So I write very descriptive, or I try to. We don't always see eye to eye, but especially in chronological order, you know. And that's another thing, I write in chronological order. One of our assignments was to put together, or maybe it wasn't an assignment, I did it on my own, but I think it was an assignment, to put together a memory of every single year of your life, you know. So, so I did that, and it's amazing how one memory triggers another memory. I also found that in the beginning I wasn't feeling anything that I wrote. I wrote and had no emotion at all because I was so walled up and afraid, because in prison you have to watch every reaction that you make for anything. You know, I mean, you can get in trouble for anything, so you are like a robot. You just don't dare react. One time my daughter and grandkids were coming from Georgia, and they made me sit and wait an hour and a half while she was in the visiting room, wait to take me over to see them. And I just sat and watched the clock and tried not to react, and really survived in prison by living 5 minutes at a time. I never went past 5 minutes, because if you do, then something happens to disappoint you, and then that affects your emotions. So you really have to learn survival skills, or, you know, for yourself, and that's how I survived. I just was very regimented with anything that I wanted badly. I would just learn to control myself. And you never let DOC know that you have a good roommate, because if they know you're comfortable, that roommate is moved out. So you just learn to really watch your feelings and emotions. And eventually I was able to feel things, mainly reading some of the other girls' writings. And then we did a lot of critiquing. And Wally had taught us, you know, how to critique without hurting people's feelings, you know, and if you wanted to know more of what the uncle was doing, you know, how to tell the other writer what she needed to add to her paper to explain things a little better. So it was all a learning.
How did you feel when you got the letter saying that you were now being charged for your incarceration because you had published this essay? What was that like?
Well, because I was still in prison, it wasn't funny, but all of the girls in my building, we all got called down to be transported over to visits. And we get down to the door, and we're all people from the writing group, and we go, oh my God, you know, this must have to do with the writing group, maybe because the book is coming out, because we knew the book was coming out, but we never, soon, like within days or weeks. And so we thought it had something to do with something good, something to do with the book. And we get over to visiting, and there's a sheriff there to serve us papers. And then when we looked, you know, we just kind of joked about it until we looked at the papers and saw the amount of money they were suing us for. Bonnie's was almost $1 million. It was 900 and some thousand.
917,000, yeah.
17,000. Mine was 352,000, and all of a sudden it wasn't a joke. It was serious, and we were devastated. And the whole pleasure or joy of putting out the book was gone.
And they also sued HarperCollins, right? Is that right? Well,
No.
no.
No, I was not being sued. HarperCollins was not being sued, but Wahida, you were mentioning that you were investigated. I was also investigated, and I saw an internal memo where somebody in the Department of Correction had written, these women can't possibly have written this. He's writing it and passing it off as theirs, which sort of gives you an idea of, what their attitude is toward the people in their custody. It was maddening to me. I communicated every step. Here's the way the book came about, and there are 2 books now. But I was just there to sort of, help the women, as Barbara said, kind of like figure out how and why they had gotten to this place. But they became such good critics of one another, and they revised so relentlessly, and they were so hungry. They were like sponges wanting to know what they could learn about writing, that their work became publishable. It came about accidentally. I was in New York on my own book business, and my editor said, "So, what's new with you?" I said, "Hey, I'm really excited about this group that I'm working with." And she said, just to be polite, I think, she said, "Oh, well, you'll have to send me some of their stuff someday." Well, I was coming on the train from New Haven, and I just happened to be working on the women's stuff. So I pulled somebody's out of my briefcase, and I said, I'll read it to you right now. And when I was finished, this is sort of a hard-boiled New York editor who's not a crier, and all of a sudden I looked up when I finished what I had read, and she had tears coming down her eyes, and she said, "This is better than like 75% of the stuff that I consider for publishing." So that was how the book came about, or the possibility of a book. I went immediately to the Department of Correction. I let them know what was happening. I said, "Gee, could you please, tell me? I'll give you the manuscript. Tell me what you're comfortable with, what you're not, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable about this in any way." They wouldn't. I handed in the manuscript. They wouldn't meet with me. They wouldn't meet with HarperCollins lawyers. And in my naivety, I thought that silence meant consent, and I thought that all the way up to the week before publication, when a woman named Robin Cullen, who had done her time and was already out, called me up and to say that the sheriff had just come to her door, and she was being billed for the cost of her imprisonment, like she had been staying at the Holiday Inn or something, $117 per day times the number of days of her sentence. And that's how they arrived at all these, outrageous numbers. I realized that what they were trying to do was silence the women. And there is also a culture of fear in the Department of Correction. What they're scared of more than anything else is public backlash, public reaction. And I think it had to do with the fact that, I had those books in the Oprah Book Club, and I think they were afraid that this was going to become a bestseller, and then it was going to come back at them, that these women are supposed to be, they're in there to be punished. Why, how is it that they're writing, this book?
Well, it's that same attitude. We used to have something in this country called the Pell Grant, which a prisoner could apply to and get an education. And then, mainly because of pressure within the people who worked in the prison industry, who were very jealous that somebody was serving a sentence and getting a college degree while they're walking around with a gun and guarding and working very hard, no doubt. And I've just come to believe, and I wanted to leave with some ideas in people's heads about things that maybe could change, but why isn't there like a GI Bill for, rather than take away the right for the prisoner to try to get an education, which we know prevents crime and reduces recidivism, why aren't we also educating the people who work in the industry? Have a GI Bill for them like we do for a soldier. It's really a hardship job. And then, there wouldn't be that jealousy. Maybe there would even be some incentive to help each other move ahead. Now, Barbara said something about she had a coping mechanism of 5 minutes and she would use that to get through the day. Did you have coping mechanisms, Wahida?
I, like Barbara, she said she took 5 minutes at a time. I just took one day at a time. And my husband, who was also incarcerated, he's a master jailer. He said, Wahida, just don't waste time. Just stay busy. So that was my coping mechanism, just stay busy. My same regimen every morning, get up 5 o'clock, pray, go run, do my little job, and write. In the evening, if it was basketball season, I would catch a basketball game. I was in the woods in West Virginia. There wasn't a decent radio station, so sometimes they would put BET on. I'd get a chance to hear some music, and that was it. That's how I did my time, my whole 9.5 years.
Did you have other things that you did?
Yes, when I first got to prison, I worked in food prep for 27 months, and food prep prepared the food for all the male prisons in Connecticut. So we cooked for like 18,000 every day. It was
It's a big industry.
It was very big. The pots we cooked in were gigantic. You had to go up on a ladder to get inside them to clean them. They're so big. I ended up going from washing pots to making the awful food that they feed us to being a baker to a butcher. And then as I was there more, longer, we had a dining room called shared dining room for the school and Datacom, some of the workers. And so they put me with a supervisor in charge of preparing the food for shared dining. So by myself, I prepared food for about 100, 150 every day, Monday through Friday. But I earned that just because I had been there a long time and proven good behavior and all that. One of the things that I used to get irate about was we always had people coming in and out of food prep because nobody really wanted to do the cafeteria or food jobs. And when somebody stole something, we would all be punished. So no matter how long I had been there, if somebody stole something, usually it was something sweet from the bakery, we would all get punished. And I got so mad one day, I walked out, and I don't know how I didn't end up in segregation, but they smoothed it over and got me back and gave me a lecture and told me I couldn't do that anymore, But they knew what a hard worker I was, and they were depending on me. I was making their job easier. And so for me to get out of food prep, I had to leave work one day and go to the captain of my building, which isn't an easy feat, and ask for a classification change immediately so that they wouldn't send me back to food prep because they wouldn't let me go. And I didn't want to spend all my time working in food prep. I wanted to try and finish my education because with Roland, they were taking away all the programs. And we were losing, I lost my survivor of abuse, I lost my one-on-one counseling. I was losing all the programs, and they were talking about losing, getting rid of the college programs, which were hard enough to get into. So my captain did sign the papers, and I got permission to go directly to the school principal, and I asked her about the education, the college, if they had like mail order courses or something I could do, because my concentration was really bad from the post-traumatic stress. So I was concerned about even being able to retain anything. And she talked me into trying one class, sitting in a classroom and doing one class and seeing if I could retain, any of the information instead of doing the mail order, which they don't do anymore. I think it was University of Ohio worked with the prisons, but I'm not sure. I think they did away with that while I was still at York. So anyway, I took the one class which was juvenile delinquency, and my teacher worked with me, helping me to study again. Instead of me cramming, I had to study like in 20 minutes, 20-minute increments, so I would remember what I had read, and eventually my grades started going up, and I ended up getting my associate's degree with honors. And I had half my credits before I got there, but I finished it while I was there. And I think I was the only one because they started doing away with the programs.
Thank you. Yeah.
Before we get off the subject of food and food prep, you know, I have gotten, you know, way more of an education than I've given to the women down at York. And one of the things that they've taught me, and you probably remember the piece that was read before about the power of cigarettes in a men's prison. One of the things that the women have taught me is how powerful junk food is in prison. You know, you don't have regular money, and everybody wears the same thing. There's no jewelry worn, and so so the currency becomes honey buns and what, Skittles and all that crap.
Skittles, coffee's a big one, creamer, sugar.
Yeah.
Any of your commissary, we call them, some people buy commissary to win all kinds of favors, you know.
Yeah.
We call them commissary hoes, but but you just you know, I made one friend who was always in and out of segregation because she would somehow get makeup into the prison. I never asked her how, but she couldn't live without makeup. So when she would come out of segregation, I would hand her a honey bun, or, you know, because she also was a drug addict, so she liked her sweets. So I would give her something like that, or a pound cake or whatever. And when she came home, because usually, you know, people with nonviolent crimes do a lot less time. So when she went home and knew that I was coming home, she had a job ready for me if I wanted it with her brother's business. And just, you know, just because I was kind to her, I didn't ask for anything back, but just, you know, taking her under my wing, because I used to get a kick out of all that makeup.
But all the junk food, of course, leads to obesity and diabetes and all these other problems, and so,
Yes.
you know, it's you know, it's dangerous. Yeah.
And then we were eating the same food they make for the men who have a higher calorie count, and they used to put these little pellets in them, which I can't remember what they're called, like protein pellets, but they turn to little pieces of like fat. They're disgusting.
We're going to have to stop there. I hope if we've done anything, we've just given you a little glimpse into what the world inside of a prison might be like. It is an industry. It makes a lot of money. If it was a normal industry, it would have shareholders, and it would have all sorts of accountability factors built into it. They are funded by us, the taxpayers, and they do not want you to see what we've just heard today. They being the big they of them, who are probably just like us, only they got in the wrong job somewhere along the line. But what can we do? That's the question I want to leave with you. What can we do to find out what goes in there? How do we get visiting rights? How do we make things easier to access? If we leave with nothing else tonight, ask yourselves that. What is it that I could do to change this system? Thank our guests, Wally Lamb, Barbara Parsons, Wahida Clark. Thank La Poisson Rouge. Thank Elizabeth Weinstein for her tireless efforts. Good night, everyone. Thank you.